long before Medusa became one of the most feared figures in all of Greek mythology, before heroes crossed seas in search of her, before poets turned her name into legend, she was simply a young woman living beneath the warm sun of the ancient world. Most people remember Medusa as a monster with snakes for hair and eyes that could turn men to stone. But that is not where her story begins. Her story begins in a very different place, in a world of marble temples, salty sea air, sacred rituals, and the constant presence of the gods. Ancient Greece was a land where mortals lived their lives under the watchful gaze of powerful divine beings whose emotions could shape the fate of entire cities. Some gods offered protection and wisdom, while others brought jealousy, anger, and destruction. For ordinary people, life could change in an instant if they attracted the attention of a god. Medusa grew up in such a world, never knowing that her own life would become one of the most tragic tales ever told. In some versions of the myth, she was known for her extraordinary beauty, admired by everyone who saw her. She served within the sacred temple of Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, spending her days among towering columns, burning incense, and prayers whispered beneath stone ceilings. Her future may have seemed peaceful and predictable, yet destiny was already moving silently around her. The ancient storytellers disagree on many details of Medusa's life, but they all agree on one thing: her fate would become a terrible one. Tonight, we will leave behind the image of the monster and instead follow the life of the woman. We will walk through the temples of ancient Greece, listen to the waves crashing against rocky shores, witness the decisions of gods and mortals, and travel to the lonely edges of the world where Medusa would eventually spend her final years. Along the way, we will discover a story filled with beauty, sorrow, isolation, and transformation. Whether Medusa was a victim, a villain, or something in between has been debated for thousands of years. But behind every version of the myth lies a deeply human tragedy. So as the night grows quiet around you, imagine the distant sound of the sea, the glow of torches against white marble, and the endless blue sky above the ancient Mediterranean. Somewhere within that forgotten world walks a young woman who does not yet know her name will survive for millennia. She does not know that kings, poets, and storytellers will speak about her long after empires have vanished. She does not know that her life is slowly moving toward one of mythology's saddest endings. This is the tragic life of Medusa, and our story begins long before the snakes, long before the curse, and long before the hero arrived. Long before anyone feared the name Medusa, long before legends transformed her into a creature of nightmares, she was simply a daughter of the sea. Ancient storytellers claimed that Medusa and her sisters were born to powerful beings connected to the oceans that surrounded the Greek world. From the very beginning, her life was tied to the sound of waves and the endless horizon. As a child, Medusa knew nothing of curses, heroes, or tragic destinies. Her world was one of sunlight dancing across the water, seabirds gliding through the sky, and gentle breezes carrying the scent of salt from distant shores. She spent her early years surrounded by beauty. The sea seemed eternal, unchanged by the struggles of mortals. Fishermen launched their boats each morning. Merchants sailed between islands carrying goods from distant lands. Priests offered sacrifices to the gods in hopes of calm waters and favorable winds. Everywhere around her, people lived their lives believing the gods watched from above. Medusa listened to stories about Athena, Poseidon, Zeus, and countless other divine beings whose actions shaped the world. To her, they were distant figures living beyond human understanding. She could not imagine that one day the gods themselves would become the cause of her suffering. As she grew older, Medusa became known for her remarkable beauty. Travelers spoke of her bright eyes and graceful appearance. Wherever she went, people noticed her. Yet beauty in Greek mythology was often both a blessing and a curse. Those favored by fortune frequently attracted envy, jealousy, and unwanted attention. Medusa remained unaware of this danger. Like many young people, she believed the future would resemble the peaceful life she already knew. The sea would continue rolling against the shore. The sun would continue rising each morning, and her life would continue along a path she could understand. But fate was already moving in silence. As Medusa entered adulthood, she became devoted to Athena, the powerful goddess of wisdom, strategy, and civilization. Across the Greek world, Athena's temples stood as symbols of order and knowledge. Their white marble columns could be seen from great distances, shining beneath the Mediterranean sun. According to one version of the myth, Medusa eventually became a priestess within one of these sacred temples. It was a life of discipline and responsibility. Each morning began before sunrise. Lamps were lit, sacred spaces were cleaned, offerings were prepared. Visitors arrived seeking guidance, blessings, or protection from the goddess. Within the temple walls, Medusa found purpose and stability. The noise of the outside world seemed distant. Merchants, sailors, soldiers, and travelers came and went, but the temple remained constant. Day after day, she performed her duties beneath towering stone columns and watched sunlight pour through the sacred halls. Many who visited the temple admired her beauty, but Medusa focused on her responsibilities. The future seemed peaceful, yet Greek myths rarely allow peace to last forever. Beyond the temple walls, the gods continued their endless rivalries and conflicts. Mortals often became trapped in struggles they could neither understand nor escape. Medusa could not know that her life was approaching a moment that would change everything. The temple that felt so safe would soon become the setting for the event that defined her legend forever. For now, however, she remained unaware. As evening fell and the final prayers of the day echoed through the temple, Medusa looked toward the horizon and imagined years of quiet service ahead. The stars appeared above the ancient world. The sea continued its endless rhythm. And somewhere beyond mortal sight, destiny waited patiently for its moment to arrive. For several years, Medusa's life followed a peaceful rhythm. Each morning she woke before sunrise, performed her duties within Athena's temple, and watched the ancient world pass beyond its marble walls. Sailors prayed for safe voyages. Merchants offered gifts before departing on long journeys. Farmers asked the goddess for wisdom and prosperity. The temple remained a place of order in a world often ruled by uncertainty. Yet beyond the shores of Greece, another powerful force watched the world of mortals. Poseidon, god of the sea, ruled the endless waters stretching far beyond the horizon. Ancient myths describe him as powerful, unpredictable, and often driven by his desires. His moods could create calm seas or devastating storms. Entire cities feared offending him. According to later versions of the legend, it was during this period that Poseidon's attention turned toward Medusa. Whether because of her beauty, her devotion, or simple chance, the sea god began to notice the young priestess. Medusa, however, knew nothing of divine interest. She continued her duties as she always had. Days passed into months. Seasons changed. Ships arrived and departed from distant ports. Life seemed normal. Yet in Greek mythology, the attention of a god rarely brings peace. The lives of mortals often become fragile when divine powers intervene. Unseen by Medusa, events were slowly moving toward a tragedy that would alter her life forever. The gods, unlike mortals, viewed time differently. What seemed like ordinary days to Medusa were merely steps leading toward a fate she could not escape. One day, the peace Medusa had known for so long came to an abrupt end. Ancient storytellers describe this moment differently depending on the version of the myth. Some accounts are vague while others are more direct. Yet nearly all agree that the turning point occurred within Athena's sacred temple. It was a place dedicated to wisdom, purity, and divine protection. A place where Medusa felt safe. A place she trusted. But safety can disappear in an instant. What happened there would become one of the most debated events in Greek mythology. In many later retellings, Poseidon forced himself upon Medusa within Athena's temple. Rather than receiving compassion, Medusa found herself trapped in the consequences of an event she could not control. The temple that had once been her refuge became the center of her misfortune. Athena, angered by the desecration of her sacred sanctuary, directed her wrath not at Poseidon but at Medusa herself. Whether this reflected the values of ancient storytellers or the harsh logic of mythology, the result remained the same. Medusa's life was shattered. Everything she had built, every hope she held, and every expectation for the future suddenly vanished. The young woman who had once walked proudly through marble halls now faced a punishment she never imagined possible. As night fell over Greece and the temple stood silent beneath the stars, Medusa's fate was sealed. The next chapter of her life would not be one of peace or devotion. It would be one of exile, transformation, and loneliness unlike anything she had ever known. The punishment did not arrive with thunder, fire, or destruction. Instead, it came through transformation. One moment Medusa was a young woman known for her beauty. The next, she was becoming something entirely different. Ancient myths describe the curse in vivid detail. Her beautiful hair, once admired by everyone who saw her, began changing into living serpents. Their scales glistened in the light, twisting and hissing where golden strands had once fallen across her shoulders. Her appearance became terrifying, yet the most dreadful part of the curse was still to come. Athena's punishment ensured that anyone who looked directly into Medusa's eyes would instantly turn to stone. It was a power unlike anything the world had seen. At first, Medusa could barely understand what had happened. She avoided reflections. She avoided other people. Fear followed her everywhere. The same face that once inspired admiration now inspired horror. Stories spread quickly throughout nearby villages and cities. Travelers whispered her name. Sailors carried tales across the sea. Some claimed she was a monster created by the gods. Others believed she was a warning sent to punish human pride. Very few knew the truth. Very few remembered the young woman who had once served faithfully within Athena's temple. As the days passed, Medusa realized she could never return to the life she had known. The world would never see her as human again. The curse had stolen more than her appearance. It had stolen her place among ordinary people. And so, with nowhere left to go, she began moving farther and farther away from civilization. The ancient Greeks imagined the world as a place surrounded by mystery. Beyond the familiar cities, farms, and ports existed distant lands filled with monsters, spirits, and forgotten beings. According to legend, Medusa traveled to one of these remote regions, far from the safety of human settlements. There, at the edge of the known world, she lived in exile. The landscape itself seemed lonely. Jagged cliffs rose above dark seas. Fierce winds swept across barren ground. Few travelers dared enter such places. Those who did often arrived seeking glory, treasure, or proof that the stories were true. Medusa spent her days alone. The curse made companionship impossible. Even if she wished to speak with another person, she risked turning them into stone. Every meeting carried danger. Every conversation could become a tragedy. Over time, loneliness settled around her like a second curse. She watched seasons pass without sharing them with anyone. She listened to the wind and the crashing waves because there were no human voices left to hear. Some myths describe strange creatures living nearby, while others portray Medusa as completely isolated. Regardless of the version, one fact remains constant. She was utterly alone. Far away, the people of Greece continued telling stories about the terrifying Gorgon. Heroes spoke of defeating her. Poets described her as a monster. Yet none of them saw what her life had become. They did not see the endless silence. They did not see the years slipping away in solitude. They only saw the legend. Medusa, meanwhile, remained at the edge of the world, slowly becoming less like the woman she once was and more like the creature the stories claimed she had always been. At first, Medusa tried to avoid other people whenever possible. She wandered through lonely valleys, hidden caves, and remote coastlines where few travelers ventured. She hoped that if she remained isolated, no one else would suffer because of her curse. Yet legends spread quickly throughout the ancient world. Stories of a woman whose gaze could turn living creatures into stone traveled from village to village and from one kingdom to another. Most people dismissed such tales as impossible. Others became curious. A few became reckless. Before long, adventurers began seeking her out. Some wanted proof that the stories were real. Some hoped to gain fame by confronting the mysterious Gorgon. Others simply underestimated the danger. The first man arrived carrying a spear and a confidence that quickly vanished when he finally found her. Medusa tried to warn him. She turned away and begged him to leave. But fear and pride often prevent people from listening. The moment he looked directly at her face, everything ended. His body froze instantly. Flesh became stone. His expression remained locked forever between shock and disbelief. Medusa stood motionless, horrified by what had happened. She had not attacked him. She had not wanted to harm him. Yet the curse cared nothing for her wishes. Over the following years, more people came. Some arrived armed with swords. Others carried shields and hunting bows. One by one, they ignored the warnings and suffered the same fate. Soon the land around Medusa's refuge became filled with stone figures frozen in their final moments. Warriors, hunters, explorers, and treasure seekers stood silently among the rocks like a strange forest of statues. To the outside world, these statues became proof that Medusa was a monster. To Medusa, they became painful reminders that anyone who approached her risked destruction. As years passed, Medusa watched the stories about her grow darker. Sailors described her as a beast lurking at the edge of the world. Merchants exaggerated her appearance with every retelling. Poets transformed her into a symbol of terror. With each passing year, fewer people remembered that she had once been human. Eventually, even Medusa began questioning her own identity. Was she still the young priestess who served Athena in a marble temple? Or had she truly become the monster everyone feared? Isolation changes people. Long periods of loneliness can reshape the mind just as surely as Athena's curse reshaped her body. With no friends, no family, and no place in human society, Medusa spent countless hours alone with her thoughts. She watched storms roll across the sea. She listened to waves crashing against cliffs. She observed the changing seasons with no one beside her. Decades seemed to pass like drifting clouds. The world continued moving forward while she remained trapped in the same lonely existence. Yet despite everything, a part of her humanity survived. Ancient myths rarely speak about this side of Medusa, but it is difficult to imagine otherwise. Somewhere beneath the snakes, beneath the fear, and beneath the legend remained the memory of the young woman she once was. There were likely moments when she remembered the temple, moments when she remembered sunlight shining through marble columns, moments when she remembered a life before the curse. Those memories may have become painful, but they never completely disappeared. As another lonely year came to an end, Medusa sat beside the sea and watched the sun disappear beyond the horizon. Far away, heroes were already beginning to hear stories about her. One of those heroes would eventually change her fate forever. His name was Perseus, and his journey had already begun. Far from the lonely cliffs where Medusa lived in exile, events were unfolding that would eventually bring a hero to her doorstep. In the kingdom of Seriphos, a young man named Perseus was growing into one of the most famous heroes in Greek mythology. Unlike many legendary warriors, Perseus did not begin his story seeking glory. He was the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Danae, and much of his early life was shaped by forces beyond his control. Yet fate had a habit of drawing certain people toward extraordinary destinies. One day, King Polydectes devised a dangerous plan. Hoping to remove Perseus from his path, he demanded an impossible gift: the head of Medusa. The king believed the task would surely lead to the young hero's death. After all, countless others had failed before him. Medusa's gaze alone was enough to destroy even the bravest warrior. Yet Perseus accepted the challenge. News of his quest spread quickly. Across Greece, people whispered about the young hero preparing to hunt the most feared creature in the world. Meanwhile, Medusa knew nothing of this. She remained at the edge of the world, living the same lonely existence she had endured for years. As she watched waves crash against distant rocks and listened to the cries of seabirds overhead, she could not know that the next visitor would be unlike any who had come before. This would not be another reckless adventurer or treasure hunter. This would be the man whose name would become forever linked with her own. Perseus soon discovered that defeating Medusa would require more than courage. The gods themselves became involved in his quest. Athena, the very goddess who had cursed Medusa years before, chose to aid the young hero. Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, also offered assistance. Together, they provided Perseus with tools unlike anything found in the mortal world. He received a polished shield so reflective that it could serve as a mirror. He obtained a curved sword capable of cutting through supernatural flesh. He was also guided toward magical items that would help him survive the journey ahead. According to the myths, Perseus acquired winged sandals that allowed him to fly across vast distances, a special bag capable of safely carrying Medusa's head, and a helmet that granted invisibility. Armed with these gifts, he began traveling toward the distant lands where the Gorgons lived. Along the way, he crossed seas, mountains, and forgotten regions rarely visited by ordinary people. Every step brought him closer to Medusa. Yet, while Perseus prepared for the greatest challenge of his life, Medusa remained unaware. She continued wandering the lonely coastline and sleeping among windswept cliffs. The years of isolation had taught her not to expect visitors. Most days passed in silence. The world had long ago forgotten the woman she once was. To nearly everyone, she was now simply a monster waiting to be slain. As night settled over the ancient world, Perseus moved steadily toward his destination. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the paths of hero and outcast were finally beginning to converge. The tragic ending of Medusa's story was drawing nearer with every passing day. Perseus had traveled farther than most mortals could ever imagine. Guided by the gods and equipped with divine gifts, he crossed distant seas, barren deserts, and forgotten lands that existed only in legends. Each step carried him closer to the edge of the known world, where Medusa and her sisters were said to dwell. Along the way, he encountered strange beings and ancient mysteries. Some stories tell of the Gree, three old sisters who shared a single eye and a single tooth between them. Through cleverness rather than strength, Perseus gained information about the path ahead. The journey itself seemed designed to discourage anyone foolish enough to attempt it. Jagged cliffs rose from dark waters. Fierce winds swept across empty landscapes. The farther he traveled, the fewer signs of human life remained. Eventually, Perseus reached the remote region where the Gorgons lived. It was a lonely and unsettling place. Strange rock formations covered the ground, though upon closer inspection many were not rocks at all. They were statues, warriors frozen in terror, hunters trapped forever in stone, adventurers who had come seeking glory and found only destruction. Perseus moved carefully among them, studying their expressions. Some still gripped weapons. Others appeared to be running. All of them shared the same final look of horror. For the first time, the young hero fully understood the danger before him. This was not a simple hunt. One mistake would end his life. Yet despite the fear growing within him, he continued forward. Somewhere beyond the statues lived the creature he had crossed the world to find. And somewhere beyond the monster remained the tragic woman hidden beneath the legend. Night had fallen by the time Perseus finally reached the lair of the Gorgons. The moon hung silently above the sea, casting pale silver light across the rocky landscape. According to the myths, Medusa lived alongside her immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryale. Unlike Medusa, they could not die. Only she remained mortal. It was this fact that made her the target of Perseus's quest. Moving cautiously, Perseus used Athena's polished shield as a mirror, carefully avoiding any direct glance toward the sleeping Gorgons. The cave was silent except for the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. There, among shadows and moonlight, lay Medusa. Ancient artwork often portrays this moment as the confrontation between hero and monster. Yet from another perspective, it was something far more tragic. Medusa was asleep. She was not attacking anyone. She was not hunting travelers. She was simply resting after years of isolation and loneliness. The young woman who had once served Athena's temple was almost impossible to recognize beneath the curse. Yet she was still there. Perseus approached slowly, his heart pounding. He knew there would be no second chance. If she awakened and looked at him directly, his journey would end instantly. Holding the divine sword tightly, he watched her reflection in the shield. For a brief moment, everything seemed frozen. The sea, the wind, the night itself. Hero and victim stood on opposite sides of a story that had begun many years earlier. Neither fully understood the tragedy that had brought them together. And as the moonlight illuminated the sleeping Gorgon, Perseus prepared to make the decision that would change both of their destinies forever. For countless years, Medusa had lived in isolation at the edge of the world. Seasons had passed. Kingdoms had risen and fallen. Sailors had carried stories about her across distant seas. Yet on this moonlit night, all those years were coming to an end. Perseus stood silently among the shadows, watching Medusa's reflection in Athena's polished shield. He dared not look directly at her. Around him lay the remains of countless failed adventurers, transformed into stone by the curse she never asked to possess. The cave was silent except for the distant sound of waves striking the cliffs below. Every breath felt heavy. Every movement carried enormous risk. Perseus knew there would be no battle like those sung about in later stories. No dramatic exchange of words. No opportunity for Medusa to defend herself. She slept peacefully, unaware that destiny had finally arrived. For a brief moment, the young hero hesitated. Before him lay the most feared creature in the Greek world. Yet, as he looked upon her reflection, he did not see a monster charging toward him. He saw a sleeping figure trapped within a story written by gods long ago. Nevertheless, the quest had to be completed. Guided by Athena and armed with divine weapons, Perseus stepped forward. With a single swift motion, he raised his sword and struck. In an instant, the long and tragic life of Medusa came to an end. The cave echoed with the consequences of that moment. Ancient myths tell us that from Medusa's blood sprang two remarkable beings: Pegasus, the magnificent winged horse, and Chrysaor, a giant warrior. Even in death, Medusa remained connected to the world of wonders and legends. Perseus quickly placed her severed head into the magical bag provided by the gods. Yet the story was far from over. Outside the cave, chaos was about to begin. The moment Medusa died, the silence shattered. Her immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryale, awoke instantly. Unlike Medusa, they could not be killed. Powerful, ancient, and terrifying, they immediately sensed what had happened. Their cries echoed across the cliffs and through the darkness. Perseus realized he had only moments to escape. The immortal Gorgons rushed through the shadows, searching for their sister's killer. Their anger was unimaginable. For centuries they had shared the same lonely existence, isolated from the rest of the world. Now one of them was gone forever. Perseus fled through the rocky landscape as the furious sisters pursued him. Using the gifts of the gods, he escaped what would otherwise have been certain death. The helmet of invisibility concealed him from their sight, while the winged sandals carried him swiftly away from the cursed land. Soon the cliffs and caves of the Gorgons disappeared behind him. Yet as Perseus traveled homeward, Medusa's story continued growing into legend. Across Greece, people would celebrate the hero who defeated the terrible monster. Songs would be written, statues would be built. Generations would remember the triumph of Perseus. But few would remember Medusa herself. Few would remember the young woman who once walked beneath the sun before the curse. Few would remember the priestess who served in Athena's temple. To most people, she would remain only a monster defeated by a hero. As dawn slowly broke over the sea, the world moved forward. The hero lived. The legend grew. And the tragic life of Medusa became something even larger than history. It became myth. Although Medusa was dead, her story did not end with her final breath. In many ways, it was only beginning. As Perseus flew across the ancient world carrying her head inside the magical pouch, he quickly discovered that Athena's curse had survived her death. The severed head of Medusa still possessed the power to turn living beings into stone. Wherever Perseus traveled, this terrible gift remained with him. During his journey home, he encountered dangerous enemies and monstrous creatures. Again and again, he used Medusa's head as a weapon. Entire foes were frozen where they stood, transformed into silent stone statues exactly like those that once surrounded Medusa's lonely refuge. To those who witnessed these events, the power seemed miraculous. Yet there was something deeply tragic hidden beneath it. Even after death, Medusa was denied peace. The curse that had destroyed her life continued affecting the world. The very thing that isolated her from humanity now served as a tool for heroes. As stories spread throughout Greece, people spoke of Perseus's victories and bravery. Few paused to think about the woman whose suffering made those victories possible. The head of Medusa became an object of legend, feared by kings and admired by warriors. Her name survived, but her humanity faded further into the background. With every new retelling, she became less of a person and more of a symbol. The young priestess from Athena's temple was slowly disappearing beneath layers of myth. Years passed, and the story of Medusa traveled farther than she ever had during her lifetime. Sailors carried tales about her across the Mediterranean. Merchants shared the legend in crowded marketplaces. Poets transformed her into songs, while artists carved her face into stone. With each generation, the details changed slightly. Some storytellers described her as a terrifying monster from birth. Others remembered that she had once been beautiful. Some blamed her for her fate. Others pitied her. The truth became increasingly difficult to separate from the legend. Meanwhile, Medusa's image began appearing throughout the Greek world. Warriors painted her face onto shields, believing it would frighten enemies. Temples displayed her likeness as a protective symbol. Ironically, the woman who had been cast out from society became one of the most recognizable figures in Greek culture. Her face, surrounded by snakes, appeared everywhere. Yet almost nobody knew the full story anymore. They knew the monster. They knew the curse. They knew the hero who defeated her. But they did not know the lonely years. They did not know the fear, the isolation, or the sadness that filled her life. As centuries passed, Medusa became immortal in a way few mortals ever could. Her story survived long after kingdoms vanished and generations disappeared. Yet perhaps the greatest tragedy is that most people remembered the monster and forgot the woman. And so, beneath countless retellings and legends, the true Medusa slowly faded into the shadows of history, waiting for future generations to ask whether there was more to her story than they had been told. As centuries passed, Medusa became something very unusual. Few figures in Greek mythology changed as much from one generation to the next. Every storyteller seemed to have a different version of her tale. In some stories, she was a terrifying monster from the very beginning, born to frighten both gods and mortals. In others, she was remembered as a beautiful young woman whose life was destroyed by forces beyond her control. Philosophers debated her meaning. Poets reshaped her story. Artists imagined her face in countless ways. Some depicted her as horrifying, with sharp fangs and twisted serpents. Others gave her a sad expression, as if she still carried the memory of the woman she once was. Across the ancient world, people continued asking the same question. Who was Medusa really? The answer depended on who was telling the story. As Greece evolved and later became part of larger empires, the myth survived alongside it. New generations inherited the legend without fully understanding its origins. To many, Medusa became more than a character. She became a symbol. Some saw her as a warning against pride. Others saw her as a victim of divine injustice. Still others viewed her as a representation of fear itself. Yet beneath all these interpretations remained the same tragic life. A young woman whose fate was decided by powers greater than herself. A lonely exile who spent years cut off from humanity. A figure remembered by millions, yet truly understood by very few. The centuries continued moving forward. Ancient temples crumbled. Kings disappeared into history. Entire civilizations rose and fell. Yet Medusa's story refused to vanish. Long after the age of Greek heroes had ended, people still spoke her name. Roman writers retold the myth for new audiences. Medieval scholars preserved fragments of the ancient stories. During the Renaissance, artists painted dramatic scenes of Perseus and Medusa. Sculptors carved her image from marble just as their Greek predecessors had done thousands of years earlier. By now, Medusa had traveled farther in death than she ever could have in life. Her legend crossed oceans and continents. New cultures discovered her story and gave it fresh meanings. Some focused on the hero who defeated her. Others became fascinated by the tragedy of her transformation. As time passed, more and more people began looking beyond the monster and asking deeper questions. What if Medusa's story was not really about a monster at all? What if it was about loneliness, injustice, and survival? These questions ensured that her legend remained alive. Even in the modern world, artists, writers, and historians continue returning to her story. They search for the human being hidden beneath centuries of mythology. And somewhere beneath all the statues, paintings, poems, and legends, the memory of a young woman from ancient Greece still survives, waiting to be remembered not for the curse that defined her life, but for the life she lived before the curse ever began. By the time thousands of years had passed since her death, Medusa had become one of the most recognizable figures in all of mythology. Her story survived the fall of ancient Greece, the rise of Rome, the Middle Ages, and countless generations of change. Few mythological characters endured so long in the imagination of humanity. Artists painted her face. Sculptors carved her into stone. Writers revisited her tragedy again and again. Yet something interesting began to happen as the centuries moved forward. People started seeing Medusa differently. In the oldest stories, she was often portrayed simply as a monster defeated by a hero. But later generations began asking difficult questions. Why was she punished? Why did the gods allow her suffering? Why was the victim remembered as the villain? These questions slowly transformed how people viewed her legend. The more they examined the myth, the more complicated it became. Scholars debated ancient texts. Historians compared different versions of the story. Some argued that Medusa represented the dangers of divine power. Others believed her tale reflected the fears and values of the society that created it. Whatever the interpretation, one thing became clear. Medusa was no longer just a monster. She had become one of mythology's greatest tragedies. The lonely woman hidden beneath the curse was finally beginning to emerge from the shadows of legend. For the first time in centuries, people were trying to understand her rather than fear her. As modern readers returned to the ancient myths, many found themselves drawn not to Perseus but to Medusa herself. They imagined the life she had before the curse. They imagined the temple, the sea, the hopes she once carried, and the years of isolation that followed. The story felt less like a tale of heroism and more like the story of someone abandoned by fate. Across books, paintings, films, and modern retellings, Medusa became a symbol of resilience as much as tragedy. Her image remained powerful, but the meaning behind it changed. No longer was she remembered only for turning people to stone. She was remembered for surviving unimaginable loneliness, for enduring a punishment she never chose, for remaining part of human memory long after the gods, kings, and heroes around her faded into myth. Perhaps that is why her story continues to fascinate people today. Deep beneath the snakes and legends lies something familiar, a human being struggling against circumstances beyond her control, a life transformed by injustice, a person who wanted peace but became a symbol of fear instead. As the centuries rolled onward, Medusa's legend continued evolving. Yet with every new generation, more people began seeing not the monster, but the woman. And in that way, after thousands of years, Medusa finally began reclaiming the humanity that mythology had taken from her. Most myths end when the hero wins. The monster is defeated, the kingdom is saved, and the story moves on. But what happens after the story ends? What remains after the songs are finished and the storytellers fall silent? In Medusa's case, something unusual happened. Her death did not erase her from history. Instead, it preserved her forever. While countless kings, warriors, and rulers were forgotten by time, Medusa endured. Generations who never heard the names of ancient Greek rulers still knew hers. Long after Perseus's adventures faded into the background, people continued speaking about Medusa. Her face appeared on temples, shields, mosaics, manuscripts, and works of art across centuries. Yet there is a strange sadness in this immortality. Medusa became famous for the worst moment of her life. The curse defined her memory. The tragedy overshadowed everything that came before it. Very few remembered the young woman who once walked through Athena's temple. Very few remembered the years before fear entered her life. History often does this. It reduces people to a single moment and forgets the rest. Yet somewhere beneath thousands of years of retellings, that forgotten life still exists. If we listen carefully, beyond the monster and beyond the hero, we can almost hear the distant sound of waves along the shores of ancient Greece. We can imagine a young woman standing beneath the sunlight before destiny changed everything. For a moment, the legend grows quiet, and in that silence, Medusa becomes human once again. The ancient Greeks believed that most mortals would eventually be forgotten. Time would erase their names. Their homes would crumble. Their descendants would vanish into the endless flow of history. Yet a small number of individuals achieved something different. Through stories, they became immortal. Medusa achieved this immortality, though not in the way anyone would have wished. Her name survived for more than 2,000 years. Across continents and cultures, people continued telling her story. Children heard it. Scholars studied it. Artists reimagined it. Entire generations found new meanings within it. Yet perhaps the most remarkable part of Medusa's legacy is how it continues to evolve. Every age sees something different in her. Ancient audiences often saw a monster. Modern audiences frequently see a tragedy. Future generations may discover entirely new meanings. The story remains alive because it speaks to timeless human experiences. Loneliness, injustice, fear, survival, and transformation. In the end, Medusa became more than a character from mythology. She became a mirror reflecting the concerns of every generation that encountered her story. And so, while the woman herself disappeared long ago, her voice never completely vanished. It survives in every retelling, every painting, every sculpture, and every quiet question asked by someone hearing her story for the first time. As our journey approaches its end, one final chapter remains. It is not the story of the monster. It is not the story of the hero. It is the story of how a forgotten life became an eternal legend. As our story reaches its final chapter, let us return to the beginning. Let us forget, for a moment, the snakes, the stone gaze, the heroes, and the legends. Let us remember the young woman who existed before all of those things. Long before she became one of the most famous figures in mythology, Medusa lived beneath the same sun that warmed the shores of ancient Greece. She walked through temple halls, listened to the sea, and imagined a future she would never receive. She did not know that her name would survive for thousands of years. She did not know that poets, kings, artists, and storytellers would continue speaking about her long after entire civilizations disappeared. Like all mortals, she simply lived one day at a time. Yet fate had chosen a different path for her. The gods intervened. A curse transformed her life. Isolation replaced companionship. Fear replaced admiration. The world stopped seeing a person and began seeing a monster. And perhaps that is the true tragedy of Medusa. Not merely that she was cursed, but that she was forgotten beneath the curse. Her humanity became hidden beneath the legend. The woman disappeared behind the monster. Yet despite everything, her story endured. Across centuries, people continued searching for the truth hidden within the myth. They asked questions. They challenged old assumptions. They looked beyond the surface. And slowly, the forgotten woman began to emerge once more. Today, Medusa remains one of mythology's most powerful figures, not because she was terrifying, but because her story continues to make people think. It reminds us that history and mythology are often more complicated than they first appear. It reminds us that every legend contains a human story waiting to be discovered. And it reminds us that sometimes the people remembered as monsters were once simply people trying to live their lives. Now imagine the ancient world one final time. The sun is setting over the Mediterranean. Golden light stretches across calm waters. The great temples of Greece glow softly in the distance. Ships drift toward the horizon. The voices of merchants, sailors, and priests slowly fade into evening silence. Somewhere within that vast world lives the memory of Medusa. Not the monster hunted by heroes. Not the face painted onto shields. Not the creature described in fearful whispers. Instead, imagine the young woman standing by the sea before tragedy entered her life. Imagine her looking toward the horizon, unaware of what the future holds. In that moment, she is not a legend. She is not a warning. She is not a monster. She is simply human. Perhaps that is how we should leave her. Not frozen in the moment of her death. Not trapped within the curse that defined her existence. But standing beside the sea, beneath a peaceful sky, belonging to a world that has long since vanished. The waves continue rolling onto the shore just as they did thousands of years ago. Empires have fallen. Kingdoms have disappeared. Heroes have become stories. Yet the sea remains. And somewhere within the endless rhythm of those waves, the story of Medusa continues to echo through time. A story of beauty and loss, of loneliness and survival, of injustice and remembrance. A story that began with a young woman and became a legend. And as night settles over the ancient world and the last light disappears beyond the horizon, we leave Medusa where all great myths eventually rest, between memory and imagination, between history and legend, forever gazing across an endless sea.